Hey everyone, and welcome to Seriously Risky Business, the podcast we do here at Risky Biz, which is all about cyber policy and intelligence and big picture stuff. My name's Patrick Gray. Before we get going, I'd like to thank the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation for supporting this work, and also Lawfare Media, who syndicate Tom Uren's column, which we're about to discuss with Tom himself, to the Lawfare Media website. We also have a corporate sponsor this week, which is Ireland. And Ireland make an enterprise browser, which is useful for doing all sorts of things, like, secure remote access. It's got DLP features. It just does all of the sort of stuff that you would expect from a, properly constructed enterprise browser. So if you search for Ireland browser, you will find them. Joining me now is Tom Uren, who is our policy and intelligence editor. G'day, Tom.
Hey, Patrick, how are you?
Good. So we have just finished, you and our wonderful editor, Amberly Jack, have just finished putting together your newsletter for the week, in which you've written about a couple of things. Let's start with the first story here, which is, you've taken a look at the issue of data brokers in light of these political assassinations in the United States. It turns out that this guy who went and killed a Democratic state representative, and her husband, and also shot another couple, although they survived. It turns out he was getting these addresses from commercial data sources, which is, a little bit alarming.
Yeah, the story is that he managed to actually kill one couple, a politician and his wife. He shot another two who survived despite, I think, being shot 8 or 9 times each.
Yeah.
He also went to 2 other addresses on that same night, and one, the person wasn't home, and the other, he was actually interrupted by police and he drove away. So he had, the FBI says that they found multiple notebooks in his vehicle that he was using, and he had a list of 45 politicians. Many of them had their home addresses, and he also had a list of people search websites, something like 11 different ones, and he'd starred one of them, and he was getting addresses, figuring out where these people would be, had details about their houses, and now it's a very straight line, obviously, between developing some sort of mental illness and that acting as a massive enabler of being able to do pretty severe harm. Now, it's always possible to go, especially for a public figure who works at a known location, like a politician, to go to the Legislative Assembly or the Capitol building or whatever and physically stalk them. But that gives law enforcement and authorities a chance to identify them, and it makes it much harder to come up with a list of 20, 30 people and I guess pretty systematically try and step through that list. So it's remarkable and lucky in a way that this wasn't, it was a small murder spree, but not a huge murder spree.
Well, only because they got him in time. I will just pick you up on one thing, though. You said that the murdered politician and his wife, it was actually the wife who was the politician. It was Melissa Hortman and her husband, Mark. I'd also say, too, that I think we should be careful not to tie a very well calculated attempted murder spree targeting people of a particular political stripe to mental illness. I don't know that we can say that. Some people are just very committed to their politics and choose rationally in their minds to go and do something like this. That does not mean they're mentally ill. They might just be awful. But look, the issue here is that we've got this odd situation where the political climate in the United States is such that people are motivated to commit acts of violence based on politics. We saw this with the Nancy Pelosi stuff a couple of years back. We're seeing it with this. We've seen judges targeted and whatnot. And it feels like the temperature is just rising. And concurrently with that, we have a situation where it's possible to buy the personal details of most people in the United States on a website. This seems like a bad recipe.
Yeah, so it's tremendously easy. It's quite frightening, the amount of data that's available. So there's a piece I reference in Lawfare by Justin Sherman, who's reported and written about data brokers for a long time. And it talks about the different sources that they use to create essentially like profiles of people. So voting registries, property filings, marriage certificates, motor vehicle records, criminal records, court documents, death records, professional licenses, bankruptcy filings, and much more. So they contain names, addresses, family information, information about finances. And so for someone who's committed to doing harm, the address is basically the starting point, because then you can find where they live, you can follow them, you can stalk them. And that makes it just so much easier to get a foothold into a person. And there's a couple of examples where, for example, a judge's son was shot. And again, it seems that buying the address online allowed him to map out the neighborhood, find her routes to and from work. But it's the seed information you need to be able to really dive in deep. Now, in the case of the judge, the assailant in that case murdered her son and also seriously wounded her husband. And that eventually led to legislation that protects federal judges. So they can opt out of having data brokers sell their information. And there have been a number of state laws that have given the same rights to police officers. But this actually affects everyone. So there's also stories of just people who've been stalked and harassed. Their information's bought online, and in the worst cases, they've been killed. And so this is a problem that potentially affects everyone. And it's just that the more common cases you don't hear about because they're not so high profile, or there's not the same explicit trail of evidence. So in this case in Minnesota with the person who attempted multiple murders in the same night, the notebooks with the people search websites, that's the explicit trail. But it seems like it's like the default way you start to stalk someone is by starting online. I mean, that's the time we live in. And that this information is so easily available. I can't see a reason for most people why you would want that. So for some politicians, and in fact for some of the people who were attacked the other night, they had deliberately chosen to publicise their home address. And part of that was because it reassures the electorate that we're actually part of the community, that if you wanted to contact us, that you could. But that feels like a choice they deliberately made where they were deciding based on the risk reward. They got something out of it.
Whereas for ordinary people, it's not so much like that. I mean, just one thought that's occurred to me here is that the online aspect of this is what makes it very, very easy to get this information. But I'll give you an example. Here in Australia, and I imagine in most places in the United States, voter databases, voting rolls are public. And this is very important for the transparency of elections, to make sure that the people who are on the voter rolls are actually real people and whatnot. So anyone can sort of go along to a building, a government building, and flip through these voter rolls. So this data, people, who might know roughly where I live could go and look up my address in a voting roll. I guess what is different, though, is that requires just that little bit of extra effort.
Yep.
Right? So when it's this easy, where it's plonk down your credit card, here's a list of my targets, bang, 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 it almost seems like it's that good customer experience that might be making this sort of violence more likely. And it's just an odd phenomenon.
Yeah, so part of the justification for these people search companies is that almost all of the data that they use is public. So their defense, I guess, is that we're just taking public records and we're just compiling them in a nice format. We're not doing anything that you couldn't do yourself. And that's true, but I think you're exactly right. It just makes it so much easier. In the case of the attempted assassinations in Minnesota, the guy had a list of 45 politicians. And so it just is a massive enabler. He could have done a lot more harm a lot more easily. And I think there's reasons that those records should be public. I don't necessarily think that there's a reason that they should be so easily accessible and compiled by third parties to make it just buy it with your credit card.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, this all. I mean, God, we've been talking so much about the privacy risks from things like mobile app data, right? Like previously, that's when you've covered this issue. That's where you've focused your attention. But something as simple as names and addresses. I also think that given the political climate in the United States right now, it makes this a more critical issue. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I thought a lot about this piece in terms of how to tie it to some of the other things I've written before. And for example, I guess the reason I've talked about geolocation data is because it provides other states with the capability of things they couldn't do at all. But
yeah, so that's more of like an intelligence risk, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. But this seems to be like just a personal, individual privacy risk, regardless of what foreign states are doing. They could also take advantage of this data, but it seems that most of the people who are murdered by people they know. This is the kind of thing that enables that kind of personal, malicious interaction. Makes it just so much easier.
Grievance murders, when you don't actually know the person, you don't know much about them, but they're a public figure or whatever. I mean, I know people who've wound up on the wrong side of various political factions in the United States as well, and the thought that someone can just look up their address and pay them a visit, I mean, it's pretty alarming.
Yeah. So one of the articles I read, I guess the politician that they had received threats, death threats in the past, and their compensating control was to carry a gun. And that seems to me to be, well, I mean, that's their choice. They can do that. But it seems better for people not to have their address so easily available in the first place.
Yeah, I think you just reminded me of that Jim Jeffries stand-up bit about guns, where he described he experienced a home invasion, and people said to him, well, if you had a gun, you would have been okay. And he's like, okay, well, I was naked at the time.
Well, so in fact, one of the couples who was attacked by the Minnesota guy, they did have guns, but they were responsible gun owners and had them locked up. So at the point that someone knocks on your door, I don't think it's the rational first response is to go and unlock your gun cabinet and get the weapons out just in case. He had dressed up as a law enforcement person. Yeah. So he had a rationale or a cover for knocking on their door. And in fact,
it's interesting, like when I think too, just about a difference between sort of Australia and the United States. And of course, as a smaller country, we get to be more agile, smaller in terms of population at least. We get to be more agile when it comes to laws like these. But, if there were some website selling this information on Australians and a crime like this happened, I mean, that website would disappear pretty bloody quickly, right? But the United States just has such a different approach to this sort of regulation that I can't really imagine much is going to change here.
What they've done so far is to address individual occupations on a case-by-case basis. So federal judges, law enforcement officers in some states, but it requires a pretty high-profile incident, and it also requires people who are willing to push the political process. And maybe this will do it for legislators. I don't think that we can hope that will happen. I think that would be a good move, but I think it needs to be broader than that.
Yeah, I think here in Australia too, if you are someone at serious risk, you can even have yourself removed from the license database, like the driver's license database and stuff, and have certain redacted fields. You've got to have a good reason for it, so that your license plate on your car doesn't come back to your home address and things like that. So there are measures there. But yeah, anyway, chilling story. Let's now talk about something. There's an update to this story that we spoke about yesterday on the weekly show. We discussed the wiper attack conducted by Predatory Sparrow, which is a pretend hacktivist group, which is almost certainly being operated by the Israeli government. So they managed to run a wiper attack against a bank, SEPA bank, in Iran. This is a bank that was involved in they're already sanctioned by the US since 2018 or something. They're involved in a lot of IRGC sort of transactions. So, you can understand why they'd be a target. What's interesting, though, is that it's also a very large bank, and if they manage to get the backups, which we're not sure about because Predatory Sparrow said they deleted all of the data, and some people have inferred from that meant backups as well, but I can't really find good sourcing on that, so we're just not sure whether that bank will be able to bounce back. But they've also gone after, since then, just overnight, they went after an Iranian cryptocurrency exchange, and they burned something like $90 million worth of cryptocurrency by sending it to just dummy addresses and burn addresses.
Yeah, that's right. So they explicitly, in both cases, tied it to sanctions violations and supporting what they call, malign Iranian activities like terrorism. So, for example, after the bank attack, it said associating with the regime's instruments for evading sanctions and financing its ballistic missiles and nuclear program is bad for your long-term financial health. Who's next? So there's two messages that Predatory Sparrow is trying to send. One is just to the regime, we don't like you, go screw yourselves. But the other is, I think it's coming up with this justification for why it's acting. So I think destroying an entire bank, if that's what they've successfully done, is a huge move, and it will cause a lot of collateral damage because it just will gum up the financial system. There's, not everyone who uses a bank is a bad person.
Well, and it will affect the other banks as well, which has been my point on this. It'll affect the entire banking system in Iran, and the collateral damage from this could be gigantic. And at that point, so as you point out in this piece, which is excellent, by the way, Predatory Sparrow has always gone to great pains to point out that when it disrupted the fuel card system in Iran, it did it temporarily, and it pre-notified emergency services saying, hey, go get some fuel now because your fuel cards won't work tomorrow because we're doing this thing. So it's always seemed like they're trying to show that their actions are sort of justified from a military, international law perspective.
Yeah.
They're trying to do the same thing here. And if this bank is able to recover, like the cryptocurrency exchange, yeah, fair enough. If there's a cryptocurrency exchange involved in this sort of activity, you've burned $90 million when you're in a, missiles are flying style war with that country, that seems like a pretty clear-cut case of, yeah, okay. But when you're talking about one of the biggest banks in Iran, if that bank cannot recover, and we don't know if they've got backups, we don't know what the situation is, but if it cannot recover and this leads to some sort of, artificially engineered financial crisis that affects the entire economy, you have to sort of start asking, well, is that still responsible activity? And, as you've written here, that's in the eye of the beholder.
I think it really depends what you think the problem is. Like whether you think Iran is a terrorist state and we need to do everything to stop it from getting a nuclear weapon, whether you believe that the risk that it acquires a nuclear weapon is imminent or it could have been talked out of it. These are all things where I'm not an Iranian politics expert. I don't know. I'm extremely uncomfortable with destroying a whole bank permanently because there's just so much collateral damage. I don't know whether that is what has happened or what they intended. So, for example, in the gas station, the fuel subsidy attack, they could have gone a lot further, but they didn't. Maybe that's what's happened in this case. But we'll have to wait and see.
I mean, it just doesn't strike me that Israel is in a holding back kind of mood at the moment.
No, I don't think so either. But we'll wait and see. But I think that they are deliberately trying to come up with the justifications or present the justifications at the same time as they are conducting these actions. So, for example, when they attacked the bank, they produced documents that indicated links to the Iranian armed forces and also I think it's the Quds Force or the Quds Force, which is finances terrorist organizations and it's kind of their covert operations type group. So they've leaked documents that support their justification for action. Whether and I think it's the international community, whatever that means, like other states, buy that as a legitimate justification. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing here is my entire opinion on this hinges on whether or not this is a permanent deletion or a temporary disruption. If it's a temporary disruption during a hot war, that seems pretty reasonable. If it's a permanent disruption, that would strike me more as an activity that's designed to massively destabilize the country. It's just a different type of operation. You wouldn't say that if it's that permanent deletion that it's targeted at preventing sanctions evasion. It's something else. So that's why I find this one really interesting. It either has the ability to be something like the Iranian attack against Saudi Aramco, which was a wiper attack that they eventually recovered from, and that's what this could be, right? Which is a significant attack, but not like, oh my God, absolutely one for the history books. But if this bank does go away, and I guess we'll know in coming weeks, then that is going to really change the entire dynamic of this conflict. So it could be one for the history books. But yeah, we have to wait, don't we? It's annoying.
Yeah, that's right. I found Predatory Sparrow a very interesting group because of the way there's just so much messaging in what they're trying to do.
I'm not clear on who the audience is for that, though.
I originally thought it was Iran, but now I think it's always been aimed at other allies. And it's trying to both really push the boundaries while at the same time push the boundaries of what we would consider acceptable, while at the same time justifying it.
Yeah, I guess I'm with you on that because, it's one thing to just vape a bank, but it's another thing to vape a bank and say, see, we did it because they're doing all of this, sanctions violating stuff, right? So I kind of get why they would do that statement. But anyway, look, we'll obviously follow up on this one as things progress. But Tom, Uren, that's all for today. Great to chat to you as always, mate, and I'll look forward to doing it again next week.
Thanks, Patrick.